Hey, good afternoon, everyone. It's Warrington Ellacott from the Canadian Association of Importers and Exporters, and we're back for our Canadian pod with our good friends at the Simply Trade podcast. And our guest today is David Paterson, who is Ontario's representative in Washington, D.C. Good afternoon, sir. It's good to see you.
Good afternoon, Warrington. It's great to see you too.
Yes, we met down at the Michigan event the other week, which was very positive, and we had a good chit chat. It's great to see you on the pod, and welcome. You were appointed as Ontario's representative in Washington in 2023 for a 3-year term, and your key role is to be Ontario's really key liaison and in Washington to talk about all things trade, but also to talk about Ontario and what Ontario has to offer. And I guess my first question is, how's that working for you?
Well, I can't imagine a less exciting time to be here in Washington. But my career was all in the private sector, and I did trade for General Motors in Canada, and did development of business around the world with BlackBerry. Washington is the show. This is where public policy happens, not just for the United States, but for the world. And so it's an exciting place to be, and an exciting time to be here.
Yeah, and for those that are not really familiar with Ontario, we're a small little province of about 16 million people. And Ontario's, I guess, key sectors would be in the manufacturing sector, of course, which you're very familiar with, but also agricultural products, forestry, mining, and also lots of service oriented businesses as well. But really, the recent emphasis has been in energy, of course, and critical minerals, which is very in high demand. And of course, Canada is home to like 1/5 of the globe's freshwater systems in the Great Lakes. So Ontario always has a lot to offer. If we were a country, Ontario as a country, it would be the third largest trading partner with the United States. So that's a pretty tall order to fill, isn't it?
Well, as the premier says, not that we're recommending that we become our own country, but it's true. I mean, we are both we are both the largest trading partner, but more important, we're the largest trading partner for 17 states in the United States,
Hmm.
number two for another 12. But more important than anything, we're their biggest customer. We're the export destination of the world for the United States. They're number one. We're twice the export destination and customer for the US that China is. To put it in perspective, we're 4 times more of a buyer of US goods than Japan or Germany. And we in Ontario are about, as you said, about 40% of the Canadian population, and we're the industrial center of the country. We're the financial sector center of the country. And recently, more focus now, too, on just how important we are as an investor in the United States. We have over $2 trillion of our pension money invested into the United States, and that sort of rolls over on a annual basis as well. So we're a totally integrated economy with the United States, and that's what makes the changes to trade policy under the Trump administration so challenging, and make sure that we've got our A game on in terms of trying to navigate that relationship.
Yeah, I'm curious, does your perspective on how the relationship is at the present time? I mean, I think the last week when we met with the Michigan governor, she was very positive of the great amount of trade and cooperation between the state and the province of Ontario. And we typically hear this amongst the governors that come and speak about the great relationships they have with Ontario. But and then last week we had those unfortunate comments from about the auto sector in on Ontario. So I'd like to get your perspective. Where do you think things are?
Well, I think it's been said Canadians are typically cautiously pessimistic, and I would say I'm more of an optimist. And I think part of that comes from being part of that integrated relationship when I was at General Motors, and just saw firsthand how many times we would move heaven and earth just to make sure that a part that was essential for building a vehicle was there on time so that the line for manufacturing wouldn't stop. And more often than not, that was making sure that a Canadian part that was absolutely essential to building a pickup truck in Texas was going to get across the border. And, we had plenty of our share of fire drills when we had bridges close, and we moved, as I say, heaven and earth to be able to do that. We know how fragile that integrated supply chain can be. We saw it firsthand in COVID when the auto sector was one of the first sectors to get back up and going in a careful,
Mhm.
medically protected kind of way, and yet we had to close down again because we were short of chips to be able to build vehicles. And so, not just Canada, but nobody more so than Ontario for the auto sector or for the mineral sector. We're both the biggest customer, as I said, and that's really important because we often forget, and we always try and remind our American friends that we are your number one customer.
Yeah, I mean, the governor clearly was talking about that high level of integration, and it's no surprise to the folks on this pod about the high level of integration of trade between the two parties. But where do you see let's start with the most common of interest. Where do you see the talks going from here in terms of common interest points?
Well, I mean, I think we've gone through a couple of stages in this. I was fortunate to be first down here actually before the election. I was at the RNC and the DNC conventions, and we
Mhm.
have seen President Trump's trade agenda laid out for many years. And so we've had some time to be prepared for it. February, Canadians got their first shock with the IEPA tariffs, or the fentanyl tariffs as
Mhm.
we saw them, and scratching our head as to why, of all the places in the world, we would start with tariffs against Canada and Mexico. But by March, Premier Ford and I had met with Commerce Secretary Lutnick and Jameson Greer. That was during the Canadian elections. So we sort of subbed in, if you will, on trade. And we were working together with the American auto industry, and we're able to achieve some really important exemptions. And so we saw the exemptions for USMCA compliant goods. We saw a slightly different sort of tariff regime as the rest of the world for automotive, where it was only applied to non US content, or about half the content of the vehicles we make in Canada. And we saw, after a little bit of extra work that we did, an exemption for Canadian and Mexican auto parts coming across the border, where there was a
Mhm.
25% tariff on auto parts from the rest of the world. So some really important progress took place in March, and a recognition that the underlying USMCA agreement is valuable. That there was some respect of that in where we are. Now, of course, we've seen the accumulation of the post August 2nd period, where we saw sectoral tariffs being applied. And that's what the
Right.
Commerce Secretary told us back in March to expect.
Mhm.
And it played out more or less as he told us. I think we, in the recent weeks, saw a concerning spread of not just the application of sectoral tariffs on steel, aluminum, and automotive, but we saw the addition of derivative products of steel as well. And that started to re-spread out some of the application in a very confusing and challenging way of
Mhm.
tariffs. So that, the classic example would be if you're shipping a steel container of oxygen to the United States, you're now having to figure out the value of the steel container to be able
Mhm.
to have it shipped down to the United States, whereas it would have been duty free before. So the challenge that your members know better than anyone else, and the custom brokers that work with them, is extraordinary. And in fact, that was a big part of the discussion that I had in the follow up with Secretary Lutnick's undersecretary, talking about auto parts. And do you even have a system that could calculate the value of certain aspects of those parts as they transform? So there's an economic logic that is pretty hard to defy. And I think we've seen some positive outcomes as we've engaged on those
Mhm.
things, and we'll need to keep doing that.
Yeah, no, there's no doubt. The complexity in terms of how the articles are treated has gone up significantly, and it's a point of concern for everyone, I think, especially if the goalposts keep moving around. I think that's a big concern. And I
Yeah.
guess you've talked about a little bit about the challenges, but where do you see the challenges? I guess in the next 24 or 12 to 24 months here.
Well, I start with the next 24 hours and days.
Well, I
We're
don't like
still
to
in a
die. I
position.
mean,
We don't want to back off the effort that's underway right now to try and resolve some of the 232 tariffs that we see on steel, aluminum, in the auto sector as
sure.
well, and some of the other sectors we see coming down the line, lumber, pharmaceuticals, and others. And so, from the province's point of view, we're right behind the prime minister wanting to make sure that, as others like South Korea and Japan have achieved, that we get a break. It's ridiculous that we would have a higher tariff on UK vehicles than Canadian vehicles.
Mhm,
So we need
mhm.
to make some progress before we can get into the USMCA renegotiation or renewal, as I think you're referring to. But next year when that happens in the summer, I mean, first of all, we can't wait until next summer. We need to get some
Right.
relief now. So we're really pleased that the Canadian government is pulling out the stops to do that. We'll see what the results are. But next year will be a fascinating year because you will have both a Supreme Court decision on the IEPA tariffs, which really important for the rest of the world. We have exemptions that we need to keep in place largely in that area. You will see the midterms at the end of the year, which could tip the Congress into having a Democratic House, would be what many people would anticipate. That could re-engage Congress in terms of their role on trade agreements. And of course, the renegotiation of the USMCA. And we've seen recently more comments out of the White House that perhaps that will end up being bilateral agreements and significant change. And there is a long list of additional issues
Yeah, I mean, there
to be
was some
negotiated
suggestion
when
of
you
that
come to that.
that we had talked about. But, even if we talk about what just transpired over the weekend, yeah, if we think about the weekend's activity and this activity with China, and we're talking about that China using export restrictions on critical minerals, and there was also talk about the duties on shipping flags of ships and things like that. Ontario offers traders globally a huge opportunity. And I think the premiers discussed this at great length. But, Canada, if there's tensions amongst other traders, specifically in these areas, I think there's a huge opportunity for Ontario and traders who wish to invest in Ontario looking for energy products, critical mineral products, manufactured articles where there was a big investment from Ferraro that was just in the news and things like that. So talk a little bit about that. Like what is
Mhm,
Ontario like? I know Vic Fideli is usually traveling and he's trying to sell
mhm.
Ontario, but yeah, there are some key points about Ontario I think you'd like to get across to the listeners.
Well, it's true. I mean, on the home front in Ontario, there is a huge focus on diversifying our trade, on large projects moving quicker so that we can domestically absorb things such as some of the excess steel that is now cut off in its export to the United States. And so we want to make the very best of this situation so that we can take care of ourselves first. A lot of that effort's what Canadians see at home, and Ontario offers an incredible list of positives, not just for traders with the United States, but around the world. And, our list of essential exports to the United States apply equally in Europe and Asia, such as our critical minerals, which will be essential for artificial intelligence, for robotics, for defense, for the automotive sector, or our potash for growing crops around the world, or fill in the list. Our high grade nickel out of Ontario is absolutely essential for the defense sector. And so we have what the world needs. We're blessed by geology, and we're speeding up its extraction and processing in Canada to not only create jobs but to be able to meet the needs of world markets. And at the other end of the spectrum, we have really smart people and incredible universities and training. And I've seen firsthand in my business career how attractive that is in terms of deciding where you want to make investments.
Yeah, and certainly the other space here in Ontario is research and education and academia. Canada has a center of excellence here in Ontario in terms of academia and research that I think could also be leveraged. True.
Yeah, I mean, I think the highest value of the stock market and growth right now is intangible goods. So while we're entirely focused on merchandise trade, the future of the economy is in areas like artificial intelligence and patent-based intellectual property. And we have had a incredible role in the development early stages of artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and massive public investments in our universities in the development of that intellectual property. And so it's been our perennial struggle to try and create the next BlackBerry with $20 billion of global sales. We must do that. That's what the American economy is doing. And so they turn to us because they need our nuclear power, they need our electricity for compute. They need our critical minerals for the same, but equally, we are all going to not only apply the tools of artificial intelligence in other areas, but we have an enormous opportunity if we take it in Ontario. And I know that's a really high priority focus for the cabinet and the premier.
Yes, well, I know that when we were at the Michigan event, I had lunch with the folks from Southwestern Manufacturing in Windsor, and they're working on. They have expertise in small nuclear generating facilities. They do both big and small nuclear. But the emphasis at that talk was trade between the states. So I think it's important to recognize here and to talk a little bit about the province of Ontario has an extensive network of assistance to business, whether you're at the state level or the local level in the United States, or you're a person who's listening from a foreign country. Ontario has a very formidable trade practice, for the lack of a better term that I'll use, to assist businesses to come to Ontario and trade, right? So we may want to talk about a little bit about that.
We have a arm's length group called Invest Ontario that often partners with the federal government in providing base supports for key investments and makes us extremely competitive in that area. And we see that applied in not just the battery sector, where we've been enormously successful, but in other areas of critical minerals development and the rest. As we go through this period of challenge, we've got a Protect Ontario financing arm and Ontario Together Trade Fund, which helps companies that may need liquidity or maybe making a pivot to be able to add
Sure.
processing that would help them do things in Ontario that you would otherwise have to use the United States to do. So there are all those supports. But I think first and foremost, it starts with a premier that is extremely pro business, is a believer that cutting taxes and reducing regulation is the way to help people grow, and is constantly looking for opportunities to make this an even more business friendly jurisdiction. And so I think the proof has been in the pudding. Ontario attracted over $40 billion in the last year in terms of attracting new major investments from around the world. And I think is really, really set up well for the future in some of those areas. But we have to make our way through this trade period. When you have 75% of your trade with the United States, comparing that to others that are a fraction of that or a quarter of that, you can't turn your back on the United States. So you need to do both, and we'll be ambidextrous and we'll make sure that we do get through both.
Yeah, I think that's the key point, and here at the, Canadian Association of Importers and Exporters, we're here to help as well, and of course, if there's anyone looking to connect with the folks in Ontario, just give us a peek and we'll, connect you, and then don't forget, listeners should not forget our convention that's happening up in Ottawa, November 19th and 20th. Remember, the promo code is Simply Trade to save on our diversification conference. So I'll end with this, David. So I guess where are we going to be happy? Are we going to be sad? What are we going to be? What's your call out other than the Blue Jays winning the World Series? I guess we should say
We're
that. But
gonna we're gonna be happy. I mean, I wouldn't trade places with any country on planet Earth when it comes to the economic logic of trading with the United States. We're going through a very significant period of change, but we'll come out fine. It may be a relative competitive advantage to the rest of the world, but it will be an advantage, and we'll be able to take care of ourselves as well. So we can come to this with confidence. We don't have to rush. We have to make sure we get the right deals, but we also have to make sure that we use this opportunity to put in place the kind of attractive incentives for people at home to both pivot and diversify and grow and grow and grow. And that's what we're doing.
well said. With that, we'll end here there. Well, thank you, David. It's always a great pleasure to see you, and hope you stay well. And with that, folks, we'll bid you adieu for today. See you later.